How y'all doing? Great. Looking good. Am I on? Oh. How are you doing? There we go. Now the big boom. Bruh. Well, good. Yes, I did. Okay. Just in case I didn't catch it the first time, there it was again. What am I in speech class again? What is this? You know? I see speaking class. I was always too shy to get up in front of people.
That is so.
Are you practicing for your red rock?
That's what I'm doing. Anyway, talking about college for the thing, and that wasn't no, that was no, just in case you were wondering. I took a class. It was one of the required classes that I had in college, psychology, and it was an interesting class, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. See, now you're gonna. I'm gonna be self-conscious, so I'm gonna be sitting here the whole time going, "Who is this?" Yeah. Keep a tally. Somebody keep a tally for me. I'm going for a world record, so there we go. Anyway, in this class, I tell you what, it's hard to do that. Can you all focus while I'm saying up? Let's just get it out of the way. Anyway, let's see if that works. I'll just do it in batches, and we'll see if that works better. Anyway, in college we had a psychology class, and the teacher did an exercise with us. He said, you know, one of the most important things that you're going to deal with as a mental health professional is you're going to have people who have a problem identifying with themselves. You're going to have a person that really doesn't know who they are. And I think all of us can kind of relate to that. I mean, we hear people who have these journeys to find themselves. You know, we watch these movies about it. We watch, you know, we hear stories about people going out and to some Himalayan mountain and looking for some, you know, guru to find out, you know, who am I and what am I supposed to do? Well, we all deal with that to some degree because we're all in this mode of trying to figure out who we are. And we get that from different places. And what he said was, and the exercise that he wanted us to do in this class was, every day I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to tell yourself that you can do this. I want you to tell yourself, you know what, you're a good person and you're smart. I want you to tell yourself that you are, you know, you're capable. You are that person. And he said, and at the end of the semester, watch and see what happens in your life. Well, of course, that sounds very, you know, like something that you wouldn't do if you were a Christian, right? I mean, I'm not trying to build myself up, right? But the fact is, we do have to come to grips with who we are. We have to come to grips with who am I inside of myself, because if you don't, there's a minefield of issues that you're going to deal with, both in the church and in the world. And if you talk to some of the most successful people in our society today, the first thing that they'll tell you is, you know, be sure who you are. Know who you are. Be sure of, you know, yourself, because you're going to come into contact with people who are going to try to tell you who you are. And if you're not sure of yourself, what you end up doing is you end up turning over the whole power of you developing and molding who you are based on what somebody else tells you are. For example, and I don't want hands, but I want you to think about it. A lot of people have grew up in a home where you were told you were always stupid. So yeah, I can even say it. Always stupid. That you're stupid, that you couldn't do anything right. You know, we find ourselves doing this. You know, and even as parents sometimes we may catch ourselves telling this to our kid and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. You can't do anything. And you stop and think about that, you know, hopefully you catch yourself and go, wait a minute, that's not true, for one thing, obviously. But sometimes we say things in frustration, not realizing that we're molding that into our children. And a lot of us have had that. Some of you may have had a boss who does the same thing to you in your job. Well, you can't do that right. What are you, just, you know, you have a problem, you know, do we need to put you in a manufacturing job or, you know, something else because you can't handle this side, so we're going to put you over here, or we're going to make you push a broom, or whatever. And people try to mold you into this mold. But you see, in the end, it all comes down to who we are. And it comes down to what we believe ourselves to be. And, science has come up with a term for this, and it's called self-esteem. So, self-esteem is a lot more than how you look. Although sometimes that can be a problem. I know I look in the mirror all the time, and I'm always getting depressed. Look at the mirror and go, oh, really? That's what I got to work with? Are you kidding me? And what's that? See, I need her on the inside of the mirror. I've just never been one of those guys that can look in the mirror and go, I'm just not one of those guys. I mean, look, I'm one of those guys that go, ooh, okay, let's put a little towel over the mirror, before we get started. But, it does have something to do with it sometimes but a lot of times how we see ourselves in the mirror, a lot of times can reflect how we're seeing ourselves on the inside. If I see myself in the mirror, I may not, let's face it, I'm no Brad Pitt, okay? Not going to happen. I don't care what I do. I don't care how hard I work in the gym, which I don't, but, or how well I eat. I'm never going to be that, okay? But if I have a good self-image, and inside I know who I am, and I say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm me, I'm unique, and I'm good with that. When I look in the mirror, I'm not going to have those issues. I'm just going to see who. Dan. That's right. I don't refer to myself as Dan.
Dan, you're right.
I've never been one of those that said, have you ever said to yourself, Dan? No, I haven't. I've never done that. I'm sorry. It's not my cup of tea. But, if you want to refer to yourself in the third person, you go right ahead. Anyway. There's the token for this paragraph. So what is low self-esteem? Well, there's signs of low self-esteem, and I never forget. It might surprise you to realize this, because I know I'm as outgoing a person as I am, that I grew up a shy child. I know everybody goes, oh, yeah. There's a gasp. But I grew up a very shy child. I grew up, and it's not because of my parents. I think sometimes there's a personality thing that we all have to overcome from time to time. But for me, it just didn't come naturally. I was not a very outgoing person. I'm still not really a very outgoing person. But I think I do okay. I joke around and I tell people, everybody's looking at me saying, wow, you're the biggest introvert I've ever seen. But if you get to know me, you'll find out I'm a closet extrovert, because if you ever get me started talking, you can't shut me up. No kidding. So, I grew up with this mentality. And there's two things that I remember, and of course I learned later this was a glowing sign of low self-esteem, is this. Anytime I walked into a room and somebody was laughing, who were they laughing at? Yeah. I just walked in and bam. They weren't laughing at me, they were laughing at Dan. All better. That makes it all good. Because remember, I'm in the third person. I'm like, oh yeah, I should laugh at him too. But yeah, they were, you walk into a room and everybody's laughing. Yeah, you just walk into a room and suddenly everybody starts laughing. Yeah, chances are they were really talking about you. But when you have a low self-esteem, when you have an issue like that, that's the first thing you think of. What's the second thing you think? When you walk into a room, people are talking. What are they talking about? Talking about me. They're talking about me again. This sounds like there's a little common thread here. What do you think that is? A very selfish mindset. What? Well, selfish mindset, when you think of selfish mindset, you think of somebody who's what? Prideful, right? I'm proud of who I am. It's all about me. That's what I do in front of the mirror, by the way. Right here. It's all about me. Yeah, not really. But that's what we think of when we think of a selfish mindset. But low self-esteem causes the same issue. Because low self-esteem makes us always think about the things that I'm doing. What am I doing? Well, I walk into the room, I'll be honest with you guys, right now I feel like everybody's staring at me. Oh, you are.
Now we're laughing.
Now you're laughing. The next thing you know, you're going to talk about me. Y'all discuss this among yourselves for just a minute, just so I can get the whole trifecta thing going here. So, you know, then I'm going to have some kind of a psychological episode crawling up in the corner. Anyway, low self-esteem is a selfish act, because what happens is I'm looking at you and I feel like you're looking at me, or you're talking about me behind my back, or you're laughing at me. Then I become very self-focused. Well, maybe if I change this, or maybe if I do this differently, or maybe if I do this. And what we start happening is a person with low self-esteem almost always will create themselves kind of an alter ego kind of deal. And they almost begin to escape into themselves and try to think, you know, all I would have to do is become this person. So what they do, instead of changing themselves and changing what they start making imaginations, and they start daydreaming. And you'll find that a lot of people's self-esteem, low self-esteem, they end up withdrawing. And they end up really becoming kind of enclosed. And it actually just kind of worsens the problem. But this whole time, there's this center around self. And it's a very selfish act. So what's the big deal? If they want to act like that, what's the big deal? Well, there's really some dangerous issues with self-esteem. Not just in a church mindset and in how God wants to use us, but in the world in general. A person with low self-esteem is basically neutralized, because a person with low self-esteem says, I can't do it, so why try? I'm not the one that's good enough. I can't handle this, so why bother? And they end up neutralizing themselves. And, you know, they may even have the thing, you know, I feel like maybe I could, you know, serve in children's ministry, but there are 10 people that I know of right now that are better at it than I am. And so they discount themselves because number one, remember, they're self-absorbed and they're looking at themselves, but they're never finding those good qualities, because that's not what low self-esteem does. Low self-esteem never tries to find the good qualities in themselves. They're always looking at the bad things that they think everybody else is seeing. You know, in a low self-esteem situation, I'm looking at the flaws in my life that you're laughing at, right? I mean, that's what I'm doing. So there's no time for me to say, well, at least I'm good at this. That never happens. So we end up doing this neutralization issue. Now, of course, I'm speaking in a stereotypical, you know, I'm speaking in a way that would make it look like, you know, the worst case scenario. And I'm doing that because I want you to understand that all of us deal with this to some degree, because it's a human condition. It's a human response. And so what I want to talk about tonight is self-esteem and how we can get over this. What is the issue? Our society is full of people with no self-esteem. What do I mean? A lot of people in our society, especially in the United States, you know, but of course we're not isolated, but in the United States I think we see it a lot. A lot of us live through other people. How many of you, no, I'm not going to ask for any answer. I'm not going to ask for any hands to be raised, but how many people watch soap operas? Don't raise your hands. Soap operas are probably the number one way that, of course, it's mostly women, but, you know, there's actually a lot of guys that like soap operas. It's kind of weird. But soap operas allows people to kind of live another life. You know, I'm not like this. Now, I'm like this here, but I can kind of live through so-and-so on the TV. Guys have other things. Guys watch action shows and war movies and all these things, and they live themselves sometimes through these movies. And we see that more and more. How many of you have heard of the internet phenomenon where you have people pretending to be somebody they're not? And I'm not talking about just like child predator kind of deals, but there's a lot of people that they just have another, you know, an alter ego online. And, you know, there's even a term for it, you know, they call it, that's my avatar. You know, that's my other person. That's my online identity. And see, on our online identity, I can make myself to be anything. See, like, on my online identity, I'm a black belt karate. Yeah. You know, I look like Brad Pitt, you know. My wife looks like Angelina Jolie, and we're all good. You know, I mean, that's my online persona. Not really, but, you know, anybody seen my Facebook knows that's not right. But, we live our lives through other people, and it's an epidemic in our society. It really is. And the whole case, the whole point behind it is low self-esteem. So what's another danger? Well, another danger of low self-esteem is being easily swayed. What do you mean by that? Well, remember when we talked about before how sometimes you will allow people to kind of mold you? If somebody says, Kim, I'm going to pick on Kim because she's nothing like this. Kim, you're just so timid and you can't do anything. You have no organizational skills. And, if she had low self-esteem, what's going to happen? She's going to start believing that, especially if she hears it more and more and more. Well, it goes beyond that, because sometimes if we hear somebody that starts talking to us about, I have low self-esteem, for example, let's use me for example. I have low self-esteem, and somebody comes up to me and they start talking to me about something theologically. Well, it may be good, may be bad. There's a lot of teachers out there teaching all kinds of stuff. But if you don't know who you are, then you might easily become swayed by people who act like they do know who they are. And they're telling you things that you believe just simply because somebody told you to believe that way. How many of you have seen that? Churches are full of it. Good night. I'm leaving. That was a slip worthy of Pastor Scott. That's one of those. My wife's looking at me going, "I'm not going to." Churches are full of people that believe that way. Is that better? That was very Freudian. In the end, let's go on if we can. Why does it matter? A person who does not believe themselves to be effective generally will not be effective. If you believe something about yourself, you will become what you believe that you are. How many of you have ever heard you are what you eat? It's very true. And also, if you talk to any dietitian, probably not any dietitian, there's a lot of nuts out there, but if you talk to most fitness people, the first thing they tell you is if you want to be thin, you have to eat thin. That's why diets don't work. A diet may work for a while, but the problem is you get thin and it's like, oh boy, now I can go crazy, and you explode back out again. But what the whole point is, look, if you want to be thin, then eat like you're thin. If you want to be this, if you want to be that muscular guy, what are you going to have to do? Is it going to work for me to look in the mirror all day going, you're a muscular guy? No. Because if I truly want that and I truly believe that that's where I need to be, then I'm going to work for that, right? I'm going to make myself into that. But I'm not going to do that if I have low self-esteem, because my first point would be, I couldn't do that if I wanted to. I couldn't lift weights. I'd probably hurt myself the first time I tried it. I probably couldn't lift the barbell, much less any weight on it. So we defeat ourselves before we even get started. So the church is bred, I'm a worm on the bottom of God's foot mentality. And I've heard that statement so many times. One of my spiritual fathers, I love the man to death. And, but he would always tell me, to God we're just worms. And so my early Christian life, I was kind of having this mentality. I'm like, well, I'm just trying to weasel through, hoping not to get noticed so God won't step on me. But that's not what the God that we serve believes. He doesn't love worms. Okay? Contrary to popular belief, He doesn't want you to fail. He doesn't look at you as insignificant. He sees you just as important as the person sitting next to you. You see, God, when He looks down and He looks at us, it might surprise you to think that He loves you just as much as He loved David, or that He loved Billy Graham, or that He loved Joel Osteen, or that He, But that's the point. We attribute these ideas to God because we live like that. And it's actually a sign of, the problem that self-esteem brings into the body of Christ. Because in the body of Christ, if you have a low self-esteem issue, then number one, you have a very difficult time believing that God loves you to begin with. And if you overcome that hurdle and you really do start to believe that, well, maybe God is pitying me because I'm so terrible of a person, that God's just going to have so much mercy and grace because I'm not worth anything. And we get that mentality. Well, the problem is that then we begin to take on a self-maintenance role. What do you mean? Well, a Christian with low self-esteem, normally is a person who is always looking for sin in their life. And guess what? They find it. Guess what? A person who has a good self-esteem, guess what they find? They find themselves. Do they have sin in their life? Yeah, but they're not really focused on themselves. They're not saying, well, I don't know what I'm going to do today because, I did cut off that guy, and then I flipped him a bird, and I asked forgiveness for that, So I didn't want God to smite my car on the way to work, that morning. And we get this mentality that this is my thing. Well, what happens if you have a self-maintenance idea, an understanding that this is what Christianity is? What's going to happen? No takers? Give up. Give up, maybe. But you almost implode on yourself. You basically just become so inwardly focused. Are you going to be an effective minister like that? No, because there's two problems with that. You're too focused on yourself, which is a problem with the knowledge of good and evil, not with the true life. And number two, you're not going to be able to minister and have that relationship with God that you need to have to be able to pour out into others. You have nothing to draw from. Because you may have accepted Christ and said, okay, I believe that I couldn't do anything about it, but now we're trying to perfect ourselves. And we become this imploding being where we're always focused inside. Hebrews 4:16. If you have your Bibles, you can turn with me. I know everybody was going, how did I get to the Bible? Well, here we are. All right. And I'm going to read here. And I'll read 14 and 15 just so we get a little bit of context here. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in times of need. See, the Bible teaches a very different doctrine. For many years, the church's idea of Christianity was almost Jewish. We'd almost gone back to almost a Jewish root, because our whole idea was, let's go to church on Sunday, ask forgiveness for the sins that we've done the prior week, and hope that we can squeak by. Hope that, Jesus doesn't come back before I have a chance to go back to the altar again after I did that terrible sin I did on Monday. And so we go through this idea that Jesus said we should be humble. Jesus said meekness, the meek will inherit the earth, right? And that's me. I'm meek, I'm humble. Does meek and humble mean have low self-esteem? Well, that's what we think about, isn't it? How many of you watched the Jesus dub that we did here a while back? How many of you know what I'm talking about? How many of you don't know what I'm talking about? Where, somebody, it was actually a youth group several years ago, it's called Jesus dub because they dubbed the voice over one of the old Jesus movies. I can't remember which one it was. I can't remember. It was one of the old ones back in the 60s or 70s. And the whole idea and the whole reason they did it wasn't to be sacrilegious, okay? What they did, though, was they wanted people to understand this is the Jesus who a lot of people believe this is how Jesus is. Well, what in the world is the Jesus done? Well, you see Jesus come down out of the mountains, And he's coming among his disciples. He goes, "Okay, it's time to see what y'all did wrong today." And you laugh. And I remember the first time I walked. Actually, I showed my wife's parents. And anybody knows my wife's parents? You know, that was a brave thing for me to do. I deserve a medal for that. But, you know, of course, the first point you get is, this is sacrilegious. You know, they're making fun of Jesus. No, they're not making fun of Jesus. They're making fun of our perception. Because, you see, some of us have bottled our Jesus all out of Jesus of Nazareth. How many of you watched Jesus of Nazareth? Where Jesus of Nazareth speaks in King's English. I love that. You know, King James is good enough for Jesus, good enough for me. And so, you know, he's sitting here and he's it's a joke. Jesus did not speak King James, okay? I just have to put a little fun there. But, you know, we get this idea and this picture of who Jesus is. But at the same time, when we turn around and we talk about who Jesus was and who he wants us to be, we get this meek and mild picture, right? We get this Mother Teresa feel that we all need to walk through life like Mother Teresa. You know, wearing the habit and the dress, which is, you know, okay for the girls. The guys probably doesn't look very good at that. You know. Well, Paul says something about that, brother. You can't dress like a woman. You know. They did. You know, robe. Anyway. You know, but the whole point is we have a different picture. And when we have this picture of Christ as this meek person, and he says, you know what, you just need to be meek. You know, turn the other cheek. Because, you know, you're just going to get beat up through life. You know, when everything falls out, you just need to stand up and say, here I am, beat me. You know? You need this mentality. And that's not what God was saying at all. I want you to think, I want you to do an exercise for just a second. Think about the number one character in Scripture who deserves to be sitting in Jesus' right hand. Just real quick. Name it. Name a biblical character that deserves to stand by Jesus' right hand.
Paul.
Paul. Obadiah. I can't think of anything he did. I'm thinking Gardar, you know. Yeah, he's on the Bible, so I didn't know who it was. Paul, that's a great example. We see Paul, and we think, you know, that dude had it rough. He started off pretty bad, didn't he? Stoning Christians, he was becoming the number one persecuting the church. But then he had his conversion experience, and then Paul became probably one of the most single important people in the foundation of the church. Would you agree? Pretty important dude, right? He deserves to sit by the right hand of God. Why? He's in the Bible. Instant, you know, it's like a resume. You see Jesus interviewing somebody and go, well, why do you think you're qualified for the job? And Paul goes, I'm in the Bible. And Jesus goes, so am I. But, you know, we have this picture of Paul as this really important high figure. Why? Because we've suddenly made a judgment call. Would anybody in this place say, I'm worthy of sitting at the right hand of Jesus? If so, we probably need to have an order call. Nobody? No takers? No hands? The point is, we are. It was a trick question! Because, and hear me out, this is what I'm trying to say. We would attribute things to people in the Bible because they're in the Bible. Paul stands out because he wrote most of the New Testament, as far as we know. Or at least most of the letters. But anyway, so we would attribute that to him. We make a judgment, and we compare, and we say, here he is, here I am. But is that the way God looks at it? No. God looks at it like this, doesn't he? Paul did what he was supposed to do. Would you say Paul was an effective Christian? Yeah, I would too. And Even so, it has nothing to do with the effectiveness. He did what he needed to do. If you're called to sweep the floor at the church, and that's what God wants you to do, because that's what God has given you the talent for, guess what? If you do that, and you just do it to please God, you get into this situation where you're in this calling. Yeah, it doesn't look as important as what Pastor Scott's doing. But how do you think it would be in a few weeks if nobody ever swept the floor? Do you think this would be a very effective church? If somebody didn't clean the bathrooms, I guarantee you it would become a very ineffective church very quickly. Because that's important. But you don't think of the fact, hey, cleaning the bathroom is not an important job, and that's just what I do, and it really doesn't mean a lot. No, it does. And that may be your call. The temple and the tent in Israel, in the time of Moses, it was all set up. There were the people that cleaned everything was just as important as the people who, were actually doing the ministry to the people. But we make judgment calls because we have an esteem problem. First and foremost, we don't understand that God looks at each and every person in this kingdom equally. Whether you be a fivefold minister or you be the guy that scrubs the toilet, it has the same weight. Because without either one of these pieces, it's ineffective.
God's house should have the cleanest bathroom of all.
What's that?
I said God's house should have the cleanest bathroom of all.
That's right.
Sorry, good.
Maybe you listen to that. Anyway, the point is this. If you cut off your pinky toe, do you think that's going to affect your walk? But I don't go through my life thanking God for my pinky toe. Do you? Because we make a judgment call and say that's not important. But you lose that thing, or even worse, how many of you ever broke your little toe? You walked by the bed and kicked it, and you just hear that crack. I'm very clumsy, it happens to me all the time. But you hear that crack, and suddenly, what happens? The thing that you never thought about becomes the most important part of your body, doesn't it? Because you're walking around like, and now you want sympathy from your wife. Oh, honey, I broke my toe. And of course, we don't get much sympathy because she doesn't have a broken little toe. She's like, look, your little toe, come on. So then you have to smash her with a hammer so she'll have some sympathy for you. And that never worked, by the way, so I'm trying. But we have this value system. And that value system, a lot of times, comes from our own understanding of who we are. And most of the time, it's a low self-esteem issue. Because I don't measure up to Paul. Well, yeah, you may not be writing books of the Bible anytime soon. I think that's probably already done. But there is a ministry, and it's just as important. Because God has a place and a time for you. All right, I think we've beat the low self-esteem point to death. So where do we go from here? Well, how about we talk about the opposite of low self-esteem? How about we talk about the egotistical people? How many of you know an egotist? Don't point at your spouse. How many of us know those people who, oh yeah, I can do that. They think they're the coolest thing since sliced bread. I know that's what I do when I was in there. You're cool. But we all know these people. We know these guys. They know everything. They know how to do it all. They've done it all. They can always do your job better. Those kind of people. Well, it's the opposite. Because what you have, if you're an egotistical person, is chances are, I'm better than everybody in this room. Right? It's the mentality. Yeah, I would do it, but I don't want to show everybody up. And there are people that believe this. But they do. And they have this egotistical mindset, and suddenly they become ineffective for exactly the opposite reasons. Because a lot of times when they get involved in the ministry, it's to show off. Well, you think you can do that? Stand back. I'll do this thing. And I'll do it good. And of course, most of the time, what happens? They don't do it well, but then they blame somebody else. Well, it didn't work out because Ron over here, he didn't step up to the plate, and So we have this egotistical mindset and this above average esteem of ourselves. And the dangers, they're obvious. if you have a very high opinion of yourself and you're thinking of yourself, I'm something that I'm not, two things are going to happen. Either you're going to crash to the ground realizing not who I thought I was, or you're going to start annoying people because I know I'm better and therefore you need to listen to me, I'm the authority. And we see that all the time. An egotistical person has a tendency to be a controlling person. What do you mean? Well, they have a tendency to take kind of charge. Well, taking charge isn't by itself, isn't a problem. But it's when they take charge and say, it would be, for example, me coming up to Pastor Scott and saying, brother, you need to let me preach on Sunday mornings because, I'm over that. It'd be the same thing. Is that going to work out? But it would be this mentality of, I can do it better than you, so let me do that. Do you like to be around people like that?
What happens when a person gets married to a person with low self-esteem? Do you find that person, it's not what happens?
Honestly, you would see a cycle probably. The low self-esteem person would feed the... Yeah, the low self-esteem person, and if you, which choice is here? Who was the preacher? Jimmy Evans?
Yeah.
Jimmy Evans. He actually talked about that. That if you have somebody who's a low self-esteem and somebody who is very egotistical, it ends up becoming a cyclic effect. Because what happens is a person with high self-esteem will kind of dominate the low self-esteem, and that kind of feeds the low self-esteem. The low self-esteem kind of believes themselves to be low, so they end up feeding the high, the egotistical. So what you get is just this big cycle. It turns into a big hurricane, and we have to name it, and it's Florida, and it's all over. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it can be a destructive thing. And it's not good for either one, because one feeds off the other, and it just gets into a bigger thing until, in that situation, marriages, if they're not dealt with, sometimes, that doesn't work out. Does it happen? All the time. Why? Opposites. If you don't believe that, look at my wife now. I am probably a 1 on the introvert scale, 1 being the highest in introvert. My wife is like a 26. On a scale of 26. So we're like this, but opposites attract. But it's a good thing in that situation, and it can be a good thing because, the other possible side of that is if both of you, if both those people understand this is who I am, this is who you are, and you know what, we need to kind of balance. Instead of feeding, there needs to become balance, because what can happen is if that not egotistical person, I'm saying that's kind of the high end of what I'm saying. But if you got somebody who's really, really sure of who they are, a lot of times they can bring you up with it and say, okay, you know what? You're more than what you say you are, and that can build up. And at the same time, sometimes a person who is balanced on the other side can kind of say, you're not all that. You ain't all that, okay? Look at me. I'm not much, but I can do what you're doing, okay, sweetie? It's not working. There's a balance there, and there's always strengths. There's strengths and weaknesses to everything. There's a strength for somebody who's an introvert. How many introverts do we have in the house tonight? See, no hands, because introverts wouldn't raise their hands. If you want to find out how many introverts you have here, how many extroverts do we have here tonight? Now, just look at everybody who didn't raise their hands, you know how many introverts are. And that's how it's done. See, but there's strengths and there's weaknesses to both sides. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to take, and this is actually funny because this is kind of how I began to learn and understand what the difference was between introvert and extrovert. In fact, before this class, I had never heard of such a thing. I didn't even know what an introvert was. They gave us a personality test at my job, and at great expense to the company. It was actually a really great thing because what it did was they spent a whole week. They gave us a test, and they spent a whole week helping us to understand what this meant. And the greatest thing about this class, and probably the only thing I actually remember, how many of you ever heard of Myers-Briggs or taken a Myers-Briggs test? You have the 4 letters. I'm an INTJ. I'm an introverted, intuitive, thinking judgment. Okay? And I spent 5 days trying to figure out what in the world that means. I don't know what that is. I have no idea. And there's only 2 things I remember about from that class. One it helped me to realize I had strengths even in the areas that I thought was a weakness. Because you see, that's the way we work. 99% of the time, if you find something I'm not good at, you'll find that it stems from something within your personality or something else, and you find there's a great strength on this other side. A person, for example, I'll just use this for example, somebody who's very sensitive and they're always getting hurt. People are always hurting them. Could that ever be a strength? Why? Because I guarantee you a person who's always hurt is always compassionate. That a person like that is always the person that somebody will run to first when they have an issue. Because they have compassion. They're going to understand me. Not because they're always in a bad place, but because they're sensitive. Somebody who is very insensitive, do they have a strength? Sure, they're very stable. Introversion is a perfect example of that. You'd think, how in the world does introversion help anybody? An introvert, though, generally is a very, and it's not if you're an extrovert, you're not a thinker, that's not what I'm saying. But if you're an introvert, a lot of times you don't speak out of turn. You don't say the church is full. I don't know what that means. I guess I'm not as introverted as I used to be. But, an extrovert, and these are kind of funny, an introvert, usually, not in my case because I guess I'm a rebel, weighs everything they say. They think internally. My wife will tell you it drives her insane because an introvert will always think inside their head. She'll say something, and I'll just be sitting there. And she's like, "You're not listening to me." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm thinking." Leave me alone. Because what does an extrovert do? They think out loud. They talk. They can't think internally. I know, big surprise. But that's a lot of times why they're always talking. Because they're thinking. They're thinking out loud. Both have strengths, both have weaknesses. The second thing that I brought from Myers-Briggs is that judgers hate perceivers. Why do I say that? Because it's hilarious. The J and the P at the end of the Myers-Briggs, one of the exercises we had to do was all the introverts, I'll take the judges. All the judges had to go over here. All the perceivers had to go over here. And we had to think of 3 questions to ask the other group. Well, that sounds like a great little exercise, doesn't it? Woo! I'm here to tell you. That's probably the biggest rift, because what happened, and let me kind of give you a background. And I know I'm chasing around the crows. A perceiver, and you may know, who you are. A perceiver is one of those guys that goes to a meeting or goes to talk to somebody, and they have to know all the details. And then they want to have more meetings to talk about the details. And then they want to have more meetings to talk about the details. And then, when they're done having the meetings to talk about the details, they want to have a meeting to make a decision. You know what a judger's like? A judger, maximum 3 minutes. Maximum. In my case, it's 10 seconds. Tell me what you want in 10 seconds, or, you've lost me. I'm just like, ooh, look, a butterfly. Because, yes, it might be attention deficit, but I think it's probably my nature. I just, we hate meetings. We hate talking about the details. I don't want to talk about the details. Do you see the strengths and weaknesses of both sides? Because there are. If you have a world full of perceivers, will anything ever get done? No. If you have a world full of judges, will anything get done? Yeah. But is it going to look right? No. But it's hilarious because when we came back together, you had never seen such a heated argument. Because, of course, the judges, being, the detailers, like, give us the details, exactly why you feel that way. And we're just like, shut up. This isn't a meeting. It's not about you. And I'll never forget that exchange. It actually started getting into argument, a yelling match between the two because it was so heated. And it was just so interesting to see that point. But, so what's the big point? Well, the point is this. I don't care who you are. You have strengths and you have weaknesses. I don't care who you are. If you're balanced on both sides, and there's a lot of people who are, they're balanced in this and I'm balanced in that, great. That's fantastic. Usually those kind of people are very stable. Very, they don't go from one side to the other. They're very stable. So, what in the world is the middle ground? What do we talk about as the middle ground? Well, Jesus called it a little thing called humility. Saying being humble and not, pronouncing my age. So it's humility. All right, you all going to sleep on that. You're going to sleep. Get started. What is humility? We'll turn to 1 Peter 5:5, where you can listen to me if you trust me. I don't know if I trust myself. Man, you're going to sleep. 5:5. Likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. That doesn't mean all the old people. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility, because God resists the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. Well, now we're back to this whole question again. What is humility? What in the world did Jesus call humility? Well, humility is the low self-esteem guy. No, it's not. Humility is actually a very simple definition. Humility is simply being who you are. Nothing more, nothing less. I'll give you a little trick question. Who was the most humble person in the Bible? What?
Jesus.
Jesus. It wasn't much of a trick question, was it? What was, now, all right, this is going to be a little harder. What was the most humble thing that Jesus ever said? Ooh, I don't know. There's so many. You know, I'm just thinking about all the times He was on the mountain. Look, if you've ever thought about this, let's go back to where He was even referring to, back in the desert with Moses. And Moses asked, "Who are you?" The bush is burning, remember that? And what was God's response? Is that not the most humble response anybody could ever do? He didn't say, "I'm God." And He had to do that with, that little spit at the end. "I'm God." "I'm the one who made you, I'm formed you." He didn't do that, did He? He just simply, He said, "I am." That's it. It's a very humble statement. Think about it. He wasn't claiming to be something He wasn't. And of course, if God said it, He would be that anyway. But He wasn't taking the humble road, was He? "Well, Moses, I'm just the meek little God in the bush. I'm just making the burning bush." "Well, Moses, I'm in the bush." He didn't do that. So, like I said, low self-esteem from the surface looks to be like a very humble state. Well, I'm just lowly, I'm meekly, I'm nothing. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He wasn't talking about the people who didn't believe themselves to be anything. You see, humility is not a state of feeling sorry for yourself. It's not a state of selfishness where we constantly focus on ourselves. It's simply living life, being who you are. Imagine that. How liberating is that thought? That what God really wants is for you to be who you are. Well, that's great! Because I'm pretty sure I looked in the mirror this morning and I saw a guy who likes to go to bars and, go gambling and, let's think about all these things. And that's who I am. No, that's not who you are. The point is this. You need to find yourself first. And, kind of dovetailing into, what we talked about, I don't know if it was Sunday or last week. But, in those situations in life, we have to find, who we believe that we are. And we've just got to come to grips with that understanding. And if we do that, then we can begin to be who we are. But we'll never do that unless we have this relationship with God. Because without that relationship, we never can truly understand who we are. Because we were made in God's image, right? So really to truly understand this is who I really am, the problem is that we live in a sinful state, right? Now I'm not talking about saved, unsaved. I'm talking about as far as living on earth. Here, we're living in a sinful state, right? The problem is we're still under the knowledge of good and evil. We're still judging ourselves by moral law. We're still, there's still that desire to kind of serve ourselves and to be sovereign over those things that we believe that we need to do. Excuse me. The challenge for us is just simply to be. for us to be able to say, I am. How many of us, when somebody says, who are you? Well, I'm a plumber. Or, well, I work with computers. Right? How many of you, if somebody asks you, what do you do? Or who are you? You know, first we might give them a name. And they're like, yeah, but what do you do? You know, what identify? Who are you? A lot of us would give our job title. Why? Because our job defines us in our own minds in a lot of ways. Because we're in our job a lot, right? That takes up a big portion of what we do. If I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'll say I'm a stay-at-home mom, which would be weird if I said that. But you get what I'm saying. There's this identity issue. But if we're finding ourselves through relationship in Christ, then what happens is we begin to mold ourselves to who He says we are. And as long as we don't listen to people who are constantly telling you, well, you're a worm in God's sight, He's just waiting to flick you off the fence post, then what we have is we have this understanding that, no, first and foremost, the first thing we have to understand is Christ died for us, right? Christ died for you. How many of you believe that if you were the only person on earth, God would have died for you? Why? Because He loves you, right? It wasn't just because, well, I'm kind of committed now. You know, I made these human beings and they messed up, so I'm kind of committed into this thing. He didn't have that mentality at all. He simply wanted a relationship. He wanted a relationship. And He wants us to choose that relationship for ourselves. And if we get into this relationship with Christ, then what happens is, if we truly begin to understand, and we work from the understanding of the knowledge, God loves me. Let's just put the lump of clay on the plate and say, okay, here's a lump of clay. I know God loves me. And if we start with the foundation and we begin to grow in that understanding that God loves me, we begin to read the Word and do the fundamentals of the game like Pastor Scott talked about a couple of weeks ago, then what we turn out to be is we turn out to be that person who God wanted us to be to begin with. And then we become effective. When we understand that we're created to be more than worms and less than God, we find a wonderful place, and that's to be in His love. The final scripture for tonight is in John 15. You need to turn around and read that. John 15 is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. I love John 15. And I think I say that a lot because I like preaching on John 15. But Jesus said this. He says, abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches, and he who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch that is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire and they burn. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask, and what you desire will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. So what's he saying? He's saying a lot of stuff here, and what is the whole central thread and the core of what he's saying is, abide. Abide in me. What does that mean? Just keep that relationship open. Understand what he's trying to get you to understand. That he loves you, and that he wants you to find your identity in him. In him. That's why anybody that's going off and doing a journey to search for themselves, they might find the sovereign being, the person who says, I can do all things by myself, instead of finding the truth, which is I can do all things through Christ to strengthen me, right? And so the very important idea and understanding is, yes, we need to be sure of ourselves. We need to walk through life and be able to say, I am, this is who I am, this is who God created me to be. But we have to do that within his identity and not within our own. Amen?